The wagon groaned to a stop, and Amelia Grayson felt her stomach drop. A dozen men were already sizing her up like cattle at auction. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia, chasing an advertisement that promised respectable work in a proper home. But the foreman made it clear before they even arrived. She had been sold a lie. "We need hands in the fields. You'll be out there with the rest of us, busting sod and pulling weeds. No choice, no say. Just another body to be used up by the land." Then a voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "Hold your horses, Garrett." The men went silent. A tall stranger with storm-gray eyes stepped forward and said 5 words that would change Amelia's entire life. "The choice is yours." No man had ever asked her what she wanted. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered. And in that moment, something inside her cracked wide open. What happened next will show you what real love looks like when it's built on respect instead of control. This story will teach you that the foundation of true love isn't passion or chemistry. It's being seen, valued, and given the freedom to choose your own path. If you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, this story is your reminder that the right person will always ask what you want. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have chosen? Your likes and shares help women everywhere find stories that honor their worth. Subscribe so you never miss a story that speaks to your heart. The wagon gave one last groan and creaked to a halt before a ranch house so big it looked like a small town, and a knot tightened in Amelia Grayson's belly. A dozen men were already gathered in the yard, and every last one of them was sizing her up like a prize heifer at the county fair. She had spent 3 long weeks traveling all the way from Philadelphia to Fort Laramie, Wyoming, chasing after a newspaper ad that promised decent pay for honest work in a respectable home. But the foreman who picked her up in town made it painfully clear on that long, dusty ride that she'd been sold a bill of goods. "We need hands in the fields a whole lot more than we need another woman in the house," he'd grumbled, then spat a stream of brown tobacco juice clean over the side of the wagon. "The owner's sister has the kitchen locked down tight. You'll be out there with the rest of us busting sod and pulling weeds." It was June of 1876, and Amelia had fled a city that was choking the life out of her, offering no real future for a woman on her own. Her folks had passed on the winter before, leaving her with a pile of debts and the miserable choice of a factory job that would surely break her spirit long before she hit 30. The West was supposed to be her deliverance, a wide-open place where a woman with a strong back and a little grit could build a life from scratch. But now, as she watched the ranch hands trade sly grins while the foreman grabbed her down from the wagon, she feared she'd just swapped one kind of prison for another. "This here's the new girl," the foreman announced to the crowd, his hand staying on her elbow a moment too long. "She'll be in the bunkhouse with the other field hands. One of y'all can show her where to put her things." Amelia yanked, her arm free, and stood up straight in her dusty, travel-worn dress, determined not to let a single one of them see the fear churning inside her. She was 22 years old, could read and write as well as any man, and was strong from years of helping her mother scrub laundry to make ends meet. If they wanted a field hand, then by God, she would be the best field hand they'd ever seen. She hadn't come all this way just to let her pride be trampled. "Hold your horses, Garrett." The voice sliced through the low chatter like a sharp blade, quiet, but filled with an authority no one could mistake. Men went quiet and shuffled apart as a tall man walked out of the barn, leading a handsome bay horse by the reins. Amelia felt her breath catch in her throat. He looked to be about 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell to his collar and eyes the color of a coming thunderstorm. He was dressed in simple work clothes and leather gloves, but he moved with the kind of calm assurance that belongs to a man who knows exactly who he is and feels no need to prove it to anyone. "Xavier Brennan," the foreman said, his bossy tone suddenly turning cautious. "Your father told me she was to work wherever we had the need." "My father is laid up with a bad case of gout and hasn't been to the south pasture in 3 years, Xavier said back, tying his horse to a post with a smooth, practiced motion. "I run this ranch, Garrett, and I say we don't send folks out to the fields before we've even bothered to ask what they're good at or what they came here to do." He turned his gaze on Amelia then, and she felt the full weight of his attention. "You must be Amelia Grayson." "I am." "You came here expecting to work in the house?" It wasn't really a question, but she answered him all the same. "The advertisement was for housekeeping and cooking. I can do both. I'm also able with laundry, mending clothes, and keeping account books." "Can you ride a horse?" That question caught her off guard. "I have ridden, yes, though it's been a while." Xavier gave a slow nod, looking like he was weighing something important in his mind. "The truth is, Miss Grayson, we do need help in the fields. We're running short after a few men left for the mining camps. But we also need someone who can manage the books and write letters, because my aunt is 70 years old and her eyes are starting to fail her." He pulled off his leather gloves and slid them into his belt. "So this is my offer. You take today to get settled and rest up from your trip. Tomorrow you can take a look at the field work and the house duties, and you can decide for yourself what you'd rather do. Or if you want to do a little of both, that's fine too. The choice is yours." The foreman's jaw clenched up tight. "Xavier, your father—" "My father will trust my judgment on how to run this ranch," Xavier interrupted, his voice staying calm but now with an unmistakable edge of steel. "Just as I've trusted his for the past 25 years. He looked back at Amelia. "Miss Grayson, I want to apologize for the mix-up and for any poor treatment you've received. One of the men will take you to a private room in the main house. You'll eat your meals with the family, not in the bunkhouse." Amelia felt the sting of tears in her eyes, but blinked them back hard. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Xavier is fine," he said. He took his horse's reins and swung up into the saddle with one smooth motion. "Welcome to the Broken Bee Ranch, Miss Grayson. I truly hope you'll like it here." And with that, he gave a slight tip of his hat and rode off toward the open pastures, leaving the foreman standing there fuming, and Amelia alone in the yard with her small trunk, her heart hammering against her ribs. A young fellow with bright red hair and a friendly face came up to her, smiling wide. "Don't you pay Garrett any mind. He's been sour as a lemon ever since Xavier took over the day-to-day. My name's Danny. Let me give you a hand with that trunk." "Thank you, Danny," Amelia said, watching Xavier's figure shrink in the distance. He rode that horse like he was a part of it. "Is he always like that?" "Like what, fair?" Danny chuckled as he lifted her trunk. "Xavier's the finest man I've ever worked for. And believe you me, I've worked for some real characters, if you'll pardon my French. His pa is old school and stuck in his ways, but Xavier, he believes you treat folks right. He always says a ranch works a whole lot better when people are doing a job they're good at and enjoy, instead of just what they're told." He led her up to the ranch house, which was a massive building made of thick timber and riverstone. "You came at a good time. There's a big dance in town this Saturday, and pretty much the whole ranch goes. You ought to come along." "I'll think on it," Amelia replied, but her thoughts were still on the man who had stood up for her, who had given her the right to choose. Back in Philadelphia, nobody had ever once asked her what she wanted. She was always told to be thankful for any little bit of work she could get, to take what was offered and know her place. Xavier Brennan had looked at her like she was a real person whose opinion actually mattered, and that one simple act of decency felt like it had unlocked something deep inside her. The room Danny led her to was small, but it was spotless, with a proper bed and a window that looked out over the rolling western pastures. After he left, Amelia unpacked her few belongings, then poured water from a pitcher into a basin, and washed the grime of the long journey from her face and hands. Through the window, she could see Xavier far off in the distance, working right alongside his men, mending a stretch of fence. He had his sleeves rolled up, and even from so far away, she could see the powerful, easy way he moved. She warned herself not to be a fool. He was her boss, and more than that, he was clearly a man of means and importance. She was just a penniless woman from back east with nothing to her name but the willingness to work hard. The fact that he'd treated her with some basic human respect didn't mean anything more than him being a decent man. She would do well to keep that in mind. But that evening at supper, sitting at a long table with Xavier, his sharp old aunt, Margaret, and his father Thomas, who just watched her with a quiet, doubtful look, Amelia found herself talking with Xavier about books she'd read and places she'd been. He told her about his time in Denver and Cheyenne, and he talked about the West and how it was changing with a mix of fondness for the old days and a clear-eyed view of the future. "The railroad changed it all," he said, handing her a bowl of potatoes. "My father started this ranch back when Fort Laramie was a big Army outpost, and the Oregon Trail cut right through our land. Now the Army's moved on, the trail is all but gone, and this whole territory is filling up with folks starting new lives and businesses. We have to change right along with it, or we'll get left behind." "Progress always leaves someone in the dust," Amelia noted. "In Philadelphia, the big factories provided jobs, but they put the old craftsmen out of business. My father was a bookbinder, and he just couldn't keep up with the new printing machines." Xavier's expression gentled with a look of genuine understanding. "I'm sorry to hear about your loss. Danny told me your parents passed away just this last winter." She took a drink of water to soothe the lump that had formed in her throat. "I'm all that's left of my family." "Then you've shown a whole lot of courage just by coming out here by yourself," Xavier said. "The West isn't for the faint of heart, but it's good to those who don't give up. I have a feeling you're going to do just fine, Miss Grayson, no matter what you choose to do." His Aunt Margaret, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair coiled in a perfect bun, spoke up from her end of the table. "The girl has good sense, Xavier. I can tell. If she wants to help me with the ranch accounts, I'd be mighty grateful. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I've been making a mess of things." "Only if that's what Miss Grayson wants," Xavier said, looking straight at Amelia. "There's no pressure." Later that night, as she lay in the strange but comfortable bed, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, Amelia thought about having choices, about being free. She had come here expecting to be ordered around, to be told where to go and what to do. Instead, Xavier Brennan had given her the power to decide for herself. And that gift was so big, it almost took her breath away. She fell asleep with her window wide open, breathing in the clean, sage-scented air, and thinking about eyes the color of a storm, and a voice that had made her feel like somebody for the first time in a very long time. The next morning she woke with the sun and made her way down to the kitchen, where Margaret was already up and getting breakfast started for the whole house. "You're up and at 'em early," the old woman said with a nod of approval. "You can help me with these biscuits if you've a mind to." Amelia rolled up her sleeves and got right to work. Work. Settling into the comfortable rhythm of working the dough. Margaret was a fine teacher, patient as a saint, but firm, and they worked side by side as the early morning sun started to fill the kitchen. When the ranch hands began to stream in for their breakfast, Amelia helped pass out the plates, putting names to faces. Most of the fellas were polite. A few were sizing her up, and the foreman, Garrett, just kept his distance. Xavier was the last to arrive, smelling of horse and honest work. "Good morning, Aunt Margaret. Miss Grayson?" His eyes rested on her hands, dusted with flour. "I see they have already gotten you busy." "I was happy to help," Amelia said. "Your aunt is teaching me the right way to make biscuits. Hers are the best in all of Wyoming. I tell you what," Xavier said with a real warmth for the older woman. "After we eat, if you are still up for it, I figured I might show you the lay of the land, give you an idea of all the different jobs. I would like that a whole lot." An hour later, she was walking alongside Xavier, touring the barns and pastures, learning the true. She finally got a sense of the sheer size of the Broken Bee Ranch. It was a whole lot bigger than she had figured, stretching out over a few thousand acres with its cattle, horses, hayfields, and kitchen gardens. He laid out the rhythm of the year for her, the new calves and branding in the spring, making hay through the summer heat, the big roundup in the fall, and then hunkering down for the long, hard winters. "Working the land is tough business," he said, his voice plain and honest as they looked out over a freshly seeded hayfield. "It is scorching, back-breaking labor, and you are out in it from sunup till sundown during harvest time. But some folks prefer it because once the day's work is done, your time is your own. Now the work inside the house is also hard, just in a different way. My aunt, she needs a hand with the cooking, cleaning, mending, and more with the ledgers and letters. She just wears out too easily these days. It would probably mean longer days, but at least the work would change up. He turned to look her square in the eye, his expression serious. I want you to understand that no matter what you decide, the pay is the same. I do not value one kind of honest work than another. This ranch needs both to keep on going. Amelia gazed out at the rolling fields, watching the morning sun make those far-off mountains shine like gold. Can I ask you something, Mr. Brennan? Xavier. His name, Xavier, felt both strange and personal on her tongue. Why does it make a difference to you what I decide? Most men would just tell me where they need a hand, and that would be the end of it. He was quiet for a good long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with thought. My mother died when I was 12. Right before she passed, she told me that the measure of a man is how he treats folks who have no power over him. She said that real strength is not about being in control, but about giving other people the freedom to be who they were always meant to be. He looked Amelia right in the eye. I have tried my best to live by that. I have seen too many ranchers and businessmen treat their help like they were property. And I have seen how that just sours the whole well. I want the Broken Bee to be a different kind of place. Amelia felt a knot in her chest, both tighten up and let go at the same time. Your mother sounds to me like she was a very wise woman. She was one of a kind. A sadness from long ago softened Xavier's face. You know, you put me in mind of her a little. She also came out to this country from back east and had to fight for every little piece of respect she ever got. She never did back down from a soul, never made herself small just to please somebody else. I always admired that about her. That compliment made Amelia's cheeks warm with a surprised pleasure. Well, I sure hope I can measure up to that. I reckon you already are. Xavier's smile was real and warm. You take your time deciding, Miss Grayson. There is no hurry at all. But Amelia had already made her choice. If your aunt truly could use the help, I would be honored to work in the house. I miss having someone around who wants to teach me things. And to be honest, I have always been handier with numbers than with planting things. Well then, that settles it. Xavier looked mighty pleased. I will let Garrett know he can stop figuring which fields to put you in. He is not going to like it one bit, but he will get over it. Why does he not like the idea of me working in the house? Because you are young and pretty, and he figures you are trying to sweet-talk your way into an easier job? Xavier said, plain as day. Garrett is good at what he does, but he has got a narrow mind about certain things. Do not you pay him no mind. He answers to me, not the other way around. The easy way he had called her pretty made Amelia's heart jump a little, but she made herself think about the work. I will prove my worth by what I do. You already have, just by being willing to come here. Xavier turned and started walking back to the main house. Come on now, I will introduce you properly to my aunt and we can talk over what your days are going to look like. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable routine that suited Amelia just fine. She would get up before the sun to help Margaret get breakfast ready, and then she spent her mornings on the ranch accounts and letters while the older woman took a rest. The books were in a bigger mess than Xavier had let on, and Amelia spent many hours piecing together supply orders and finding out where the money went. She soon discovered that Garrett had been ordering way too much of certain supplies and was likely pocketing the extra profits. When she brought what she had found to Xavier, he took care of the whole business quickly and quietly. Her afternoons were for cooking, putting up food from the garden, mending clothes and gear, and doing all the 1,000 little jobs that keep a home running smooth. Margaret was a patient teacher, sharing not just her skills but her stories, telling Amelia all about the early days of the ranch and the wild, dangerous beauty of this land. Most evenings, Amelia would end up on the wide front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the hands finish up their chores and the sun bleed all shades of gold and red across the big western sky. Xavier often came and sat with her, and they would talk about anything and everything, from books and politics to ranching and dreams to the past and the future you could not be sure of. Do you miss Philadelphia? he asked her one evening late in July, as they watched a storm roll in over the mountains. I miss having family, Amelia confessed. But I do not miss the city itself. There is a kind of freedom out here I never knew back east. There is room to breathe. This country gets into your blood, Xavier said. Once it does, a city just feels like a cage. He was silent for a second, and then he added, I am mighty glad you chose to stay. You have made a real difference around here, Amelia. My aunt has not been this happy in years, and the books are in better shape than they have ever been. I am glad I stayed, too. She meant every single word of it. In the time since she had arrived, the Broken Bee Ranch had started to feel more like home than Philadelphia ever did, and Xavier had become something she was almost afraid to put a name to, a man whose presence made her days feel brighter, and her own heart beat a little faster. The dance he spoke of came and went, and Amelia went with everyone from the ranch, wearing her nicest dress and trying her best not to see how many women in Fort Laramie were making eyes at Xavier. He danced with her 2 times, his hand warm and steady on her waist, and the closeness of it stayed with her for days after. August rolled in and brought the hardest work of the year, with the haying going full force and every last person on the ranch needed. Even with her house duties, Amelia found herself working in the kitchen around the clock, making huge meals for the crews from before dawn until well after dark. Xavier was a whirlwind, organizing all the work, jumping in wherever he was needed, and pushing himself harder than anybody. She did not see much of him during those weeks, and she was caught off guard by just how much she missed their evening talks. One afternoon, she carried water out to the hay crews and found Xavier working without a shirt, his skin tanned by the sun and gleaming with sweat, as he pitched hay onto a wagon. The sight of him stopped her dead in her tracks, and a heat rose in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the August sun. He saw her and stood up straight, wiping his forehead with his arm. Well, if you are not a blessed sight, Amelia Grayson, he said, walking over to get a dipper of water. It has got to be 95 degrees out here. Now, you drink that slowly, she cautioned, trying her best not to stare at the strong muscles of his chest and arms. You will make yourself sick. He did as she said, then filled a second dipper and poured it right over his head, shaking the water from his hair like a wet dog. Little drops scattered all over Amelia's dress, and she laughed in spite of herself. You are terrible. I am hot and tired, and there are 3 more hours of daylight, Xavier said, but he was smiling. Thank you for bringing the water. You did not have to walk all the way out here. I wanted to. The words slipped out before she could catch them, and their eyes met. Something passed between them, like a spark, and it was undeniable. Amelia felt her breath catch in her throat. Amelia, Xavier started to say, but one of the hands interrupted from the wagon, shouting that they were ready to move on to the next field. The moment was broken. Xavier handed her the dipper back, and you could tell he hated to do it. I should get back to it, of course. Amelia took a step back, her heart just pounding. I will see you at dinner. You can count on it. He held her gaze for just a moment longer, then turned back to the hay wagon. Amelia walked back to the house with shaking hands, wondering if she had only imagined the fire she saw in his eyes. That night at dinner, Xavier's father, Thomas, finally broke his month-long silence with her. You have done good work with the accounts, Miss Grayson, he said, sounding like he was chewing on the words. Better than I expected from an Easterner. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. What Thomas is trying to say, Margaret cut in, giving her brother a sharp look, is that you have earned your place here. I had figured that out months back. Xavier, all scrubbed clean and in fresh clothes, met Amelia's gaze from across the table. He gave her a quiet little smile that sent a shiver right down to her toes. She was wandering into some mighty, dangerous country. She knew that falling for the man who signed her checks was a fool's game, one that could only end in heartbreak. But her heart, well, it didn't seem to give a darn about what was practical. She had never felt this way about any man before Xavier Brennan. She had never known this constant, aching knowledge of someone else, being near, this powerful need to just be close to him. After supper, she slipped out onto the porch, just needing some fresh air to clear her thoughts. She'd only been out there a minute or two when the door creaked open behind her. She didn't even have to look to know it was Xavier. She could feel his presence like folks feel a storm rolling in across the plains. "You have been keeping your distance from me," he said in a low voice, coming to lean on the railing beside her. "I have been busy with work, Amelia." He paused until she finally met his eyes. "Did I do something that made you feel uneasy out in the field this afternoon?" "No." She made herself look him square in the eye. "You did nothing wrong, Xavier. I'm just being a fool." "About what?" She ought to lie. She should make up some story, retreat to the safety of her room, and put that proper wall back up between them. But she was so tired of hiding, tired of pretending, and tired of being what everyone else wanted her to be, instead of who she truly was. "About you," she said, the words spilling out. "I am being a fool about you." Xavier stood as still as a statue. "A fool? In what way?" "The way a woman is a fool when she forgets her station and starts to have feelings for her boss that she has no business having." Amelia said it all in a breathless rush. "I know it is not right. I know I should not feel this way, but I cannot seem to stop it. And I figured you ought to know, so you can send me packing if you need to before I make things any more awkward than they already are." "Amelia, look at me." Xavier's voice was heavy. "Please." She lifted her gaze to his face and found him looking at her with a fire that just stole her breath away. "Do you honestly believe," he said, his words slow and measured, "that I have spent every single evening talking with you for months just to be polite? That I ask you to dance at town socials because I feel like I have to? That I notice every time you smile, every time you laugh, every time you step into a room just because you work for me and that is all?" A little flame of hope flickered to life inside her chest, so strong it almost hurt. "Xavier, I've been nearly out of my mind these past weeks, trying to puzzle out if you felt anything for me besides being grateful or friendly," he went on, taking a step closer. "I did not want to push the matter because you work here, and the last thing I ever wanted was for you to feel cornered. Your freedom to choose always mattered more to me than what I wanted. But if you are telling me what I hope you are telling me—" "I am falling in love with you," Amelia whispered. "I think I have been, ever since that first day you told me I could pick my own chores." Xavier's eyes shut for a second, and when they opened, they were burning with a look that made her knees feel like jelly. "I have been in love with you since you stood in that dusty yard and refused to let Garrett's foolishness make you feel small. I took one look at you and thought, there she is, the woman I have been waiting my whole life for." Xavier. His name felt like a prayer on her lips. "I have nothing. No money, no kin, no future to speak of. I should not—" "You have everything that counts," he cut in, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. His palms were rough with work but so warm against her skin. "You are smart and brave and good-hearted. You make my aunt laugh out loud. You run this house better than anyone I have ever known, and you look at me like I hung the moon and stars. Amelia Grayson, I do not give a single damn about money or prospects. All I care about is you. Will you let me court you the right way? With everyone knowing my intentions and you knowing that I am hoping one day to make you my wife." Tears streamed down her face, but she was laughing right through them. "Yes, yes, Xavier, I will." He leaned down and kissed her then, a kiss as soft and gentle as a whisper, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. Amelia's hands clutched at his shirt, holding on to him as the whole world seemed to spin and settle into a place that was brand new and wonderful. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to do this right," he promised. "I am going to court you like you deserve, take you on real outings, bring you flowers, and ask your permission for every single step. You are not going to have a single doubt about how I feel or what I am aiming for." "I already do not have any doubts," Amelia said, smiling up at him, "but I surely will not say no to flowers." He let out a joyful laugh and kissed her again. From inside, Amelia could hear Margaret's voice saying something that sounded mighty pleased, and she knew the older woman must have been watching from the window. The idea made her cheeks burn, but she could not find it in herself to mind. She was in Xavier's arms, and he loved her, and the future that had looked so empty and scary now stretched out ahead of her, just full of promise. The rest of August and all of September passed by in a warm, happy dream. Xavier courted her with a kind of devotion that made her heart swell, stealing private moments with her any chance he got. He brought her wildflowers he picked from the meadows and took her riding on Sunday afternoons when the work finally let up. He held her hand on evening walks and kissed her goodnight on the porch with a sweetness that left her wanting more. He made certain that everyone on the ranch and all through Fort Laramie knew that Amelia Grayson was the woman he planned to marry. Margaret was tickled pink, swearing she saw it coming from the very first week and had been praying for it all along. Thomas was a quieter man, but he admitted his son could do a whole lot worse than a hard-working woman with good sense. The ranch hands gave Xavier a merciless but friendly ribbing, and a few of them told Amelia on the quiet that they had never seen their boss so happy. Garrett finally left the ranch in early October, finding work at a neighboring spread. Xavier hired a younger fellow named Sam to take his place, who respected Amelia's role in the house and treated the other hands with fairness. The whole feel of the ranch improved almost overnight. In late October, when the aspen trees turned to gold and the first real frost settled on the ground, Xavier took Amelia riding up into the foothills. They reined in at a high meadow with a view that went on for miles and miles. The ranch was laid out below them like a beautiful promise. He helped her down from her horse, and then, to her complete surprise, he went down on one knee. "I know we have not been courting for long, not by the standards back east," he said, taking a ring from his pocket. It was a simple thing, just a gold band with a little sapphire that shone in the autumn sun. "But I have known since the very day we met that you were meant for me, and I was meant for you. I love you, Amelia. I love your strength, your laugh, and the way you make everything around you a better place just by being there. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner, the person I build my whole life with?" "Yes," Amelia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then got to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a fire that made the rest of the world just fade away. When they finally came up for air, both of them flushed and breathless, Xavier pressed his lips to her forehead. "I am going to spend the rest of my days making you happy." "You already do," Amelia whispered, "every single day." They got married in Fort Laramie on a crisp, clear day in November. The little church was packed with nearly half the town. Amelia wore a dress of deep blue silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and Xavier wore his best suit with a string tie. He looked so handsome that Amelia's breath caught in her throat when she saw him waiting up at the altar. They said their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor each other. When the preacher declared them man and wife, Xavier kissed her with so much tenderness that you could hear a few women in the pews let out a soft sigh. The party was back at the ranch, with tables loaded down with food and music from a trio of fiddle players from town. Amelia danced until her feet flat-out ached, first swept across the floor by Xavier, then by a long line of folks wishing them well. But no matter what, her eyes always found her husband across the crowded room, and he was always watching her with a look that made her blood run warm. Late that evening, Xavier gently pulled her away from the party. He led her through the house to the room they would share now, the big master bedroom on the second floor he had gotten ready for them. Someone, and it was probably Margaret, had filled it with candles and the last of the season's roses. The bed was piled high with quilts, and a warm fire was crackling in the fireplace. Xavier shut the door behind them and turned to her, a hint of shyness in his eyes. "Amelia, if you want to wait." "I do not want to wait," she said, reaching up to loosen his tie. "I am your wife now, Xavier. I want all of this, all of you." He took her hands in his and raised them to his lips. I have never done this before. I am probably going to be clumsy at it. His confession caught her by surprise. Truly, I wanted to wait for the right woman. His eyes searched hers for a moment. I am so glad I did. I have not either, Amelia admitted softly. We will just have to figure it out together. And they did, with gentleness and laughter and moments that left them both breathless with wonder. Xavier undressed her slowly, like she was something precious, like she was the most precious thing on earth. And when they finally met in that big bed, it was a little awkward but honest and just about perfect. Later, as she lay in his arms with her head resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, Amelia thought about the long road that had brought her to this place. The heartache and the loss, the huge gamble she took coming out west, and the fear of that first day when she figured she was just another face in the crowd, destined for the fields. "What's on your mind?" Xavier whispered, his fingers drawing slow circles on her bare shoulder. "About choices," Amelia answered. "I was thinking about how you gave me the freedom to pick my own way, and how that one thing changed my entire life." "You chose me," Xavier said, a sense of wonder in his voice. "With all the things you could have done, and all the places you could have gone, you chose to be with me." "I chose you," Amelia affirmed, "because you looked at me and saw a person, not just a piece of property. Because you showed me respect long before you ever started to love me. Because you are the finest man I have ever known." Xavier held her a little tighter, kissing the top of her head. "I will spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of the faith you have in me." "You already are," she whispered back. Their first winter as husband and wife was a tough one, with blizzards that howled for days and temperatures that plunged well below freezing. But inside the ranch house it was warm, and Amelia had never known such happiness. She and Xavier fell into a natural partnership that just worked, running the ranch side by side, making every decision together, and creating something that belonged to both of them. Margaret took Amelia under her wing and taught her the ways of ranching and life on the frontier, sharing wisdom gathered over many decades. By the time spring arrived, Amelia felt like she had been in Wyoming her whole life. In April, Amelia found out she was with child. She told Xavier one evening after they had finished supper, taking him into their room and saying the words softly, watching as pure joy lit up his face. He fell to his knees and gently pressed his face to her belly, which was still flat, wrapping his arms around her waist as she heard him whisper a quiet prayer of thanks. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet with tears. "We are going to have a baby," he said, the amazement clear in his voice. "Amelia, we are going to be a family." "Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could plain as day see the answer shining in his eyes. "Happy does not even come close to it." He gave her a soft kiss. "You have given me everything I could ever ask for, Amelia Brennan. Everything I ever wanted, and so many things I never even knew my heart was missing." Their son was born in January of 1878, in a quiet spell between two winter storms. The birth was difficult, and it dragged on, and for a little while Amelia worried she might not make it through. But Margaret was right there with her, along with a doctor who came all the way from Fort Laramie. And then, after long hours of effort, she heard the cry of a newborn baby. Xavier, who had been told to stay out but kept poking his head back in, was by her side in an instant, tears running down his cheeks as the doctor laid their son in her arms. "He is just perfect," Xavier breathed out, gently touching the baby's tiny fingers with one careful finger. "Amelia, he is absolutely perfect." "Nathan," Amelia said, the name just coming to her, as easy as taking a breath. "Nathan Xavier Brennan." "Nathan," Xavier said again, trying out the name. "I love it." "Good Lord, Amelia. I love you. I love you so much." Nathan was a strong, loud baby who right away became the heart of their home. Margaret doted on him something fierce. And even Thomas found his soft spot, spending hours telling his grandson tales of the old days. Xavier was a wonderful father, getting up in the middle of the night to walk with Nathan when he was fussy, changing his swaddling clothes without a word of complaint, and just staring at his son with a look of such deep love it made Amelia's own heart ache. The ranch kept on growing under their shared guidance. Amelia discovered a surprising knack for breeding horses, and she started a line of strong, smart animals that became known all across the territory. Xavier grew the cattle herd and brought in better breeding stock. Side by side, they faced down droughts and hard winters. They saw good years and they saw lean ones. And they built not just a thriving business, but a true legacy. Their second child, a little girl they named Clara Margaret, was born in the spring of 1880. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, and she had a sweet nature that was a perfect balance to her brother's rowdy spirit. 2 years later, they had another boy, James, who was quieter than the other two, but had a stubborn streak of determination when he put his mind to something. The years just seemed to fly by, filled with hard work and good laughs and all the little moments that make up a family. Amelia watched her children grow up, teaching them their letters and numbers right there at the kitchen table, while Xavier taught them how to ride and rope and look after the land. She saw Nathan grow into his father's sense of what was right and his ability to lead. Clara had a real gift for drawing and painting that surprised everyone. James, it turned out, had a way with horses that was every bit as good as her own. Margaret passed on in her sleep in 1883, and they laid her to rest on a hill that looked out over the ranch and the mountains she had always loved. Thomas joined her 2 years after that, and the ranch passed fully to Xavier, though he had really been running the place for a good long while. The first thing he did was make Amelia a full legal partner, getting papers drawn up that gave her equal ownership and an equal voice in every choice they made. "This place has always been ours together," he told her when she said it was not necessary. "I am just making it official, that is all." Wyoming became a state in 1890, and Amelia and Xavier celebrated with their children and the whole ranch community that had become like their own kin. Fort Laramie had grown from a little frontier post into a real town with its own schools and churches and shops. The railroad brought a new wave of prosperity, and the Broken Bee Ranch grew right along with the times. In the evenings, Amelia and Xavier would still sit out on the front porch just like always, watching the setting sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. Their hands were rougher now, and their faces were lined by years of sun and wind, but the love they shared had only grown stronger. Xavier still looked at her the same way he had on that very first day, like she was the answer to a prayer he had been saying his whole life. "You ever have second thoughts?" Amelia asked him one evening in the summer of 1895, as they watched Nathan and his new wife working some horses in the corral, while Clara taught James's little ones how to ride. "About coming out to this wild country and building this life?" Xavier turned to her, and the warmth and love in his eyes still took her breath away, even after almost 20 years together. "My only regret is that it took me so long to find you. Everything else has been a dream come true." "I was so terrified that first day," Amelia confessed, "when I thought I was just going to be another hand sent out to the fields, like I did not count for anything, like what I wanted did not matter. And then you told me I had a choice. You changed my whole world with just those words." She leaned against him, and his arm came around her in that old, familiar way that always felt like home. "You saw me, Xavier. You treated me like I mattered before you ever loved me, before you knew a single thing about me except that I was a person who deserved a little respect. That is just the kind of man you are. It is why our children are growing up to be good, decent people who treat others the right way." "We built a good thing here," Xavier said, his eyes scanning the ranch they had made together. "It is more than just a profitable operation. It is a place where folks are treated with decency, where a hard day's work means something, but so does being kind. A place where people have choices, just like you gave me, just like we try to give everyone." He kissed her on the temple. "That is the legacy I want to leave behind. Not just the land and the cattle, but the example of how to live a good and honest life." Amelia thought back to the girl she used to be, stepping off that wagon with nothing but a small trunk and a whole lot of desperate hope. She thought about how easily her life could have gone down a different path. One where she would have been just another nameless woman working in the fields until her strength gave out. And she thought about the man who had seen her value and given her a chance, who had loved her not for what she had, but for who she was deep down inside. "I love you," she said, and the words were as true today as the very first time she had ever spoken them. "I will love you until my last breath, and even after that." "And I love you," Xavier answered, his voice thick with emotion. "My partner, my wife, and my whole heart." They sat there together as the sun dipped below the mountains, and the first stars began to pop out in the evening sky, the sound of their children's laughter drifting up from the corral. The ranch they had built together was settling down for the night all around them. This life they had carved out of the wild Wyoming frontier had not always been easy, but it was theirs. It was built on a foundation of respect and love, and it was the life they had both chosen, every step of the way. Nathan started taking on more of the daily work at the ranch as time went on, and he showed he was every bit as capable and fair as his daddy. Clara ended up marrying a school teacher from Cheyenne and split her time between living in town and coming home to the ranch. Her paintings started to get noticed all over the region, and James, who was always the quiet one, became the finest horse trainer in 3 territories. He came up with a way of gentling horses that was kind as it was effective. Amelia and Xavier moved into a smaller house on the ranch in 1900, giving the main house over to Nathan and his growing family, but they stayed involved in running the place for years to come. They were in their 60s when the new century rolled in, still taking their rides together on Sunday mornings, still watching the sunset from the porch in the evenings, and still finishing the other's thoughts and speaking volumes with a single look, a habit their children found both hilarious and deeply moving. "It's like they're still courting after all this time," Clara pointed out to her brothers during one Thanksgiving get-together. "Just look at 'em. Father brought Mother flowers, acting like he's still trying to win her heart. He told me one time that he never wanted a day to go by where she'd forget how much he cherished her," Nathan added, watching his folks walk arm in arm toward the horse barn. "He said that love isn't just some passing feeling, but a decision you stand by every single morning." "He sure chose right," James said softly. "And she did too. Just look at what they built from the ground up. Not just this ranch, but every one of us. A whole family, a whole community right here. It all started because Father gave Mother the chance to walk her own path, and that path led her straight to him." The 3 siblings stood there for a moment, watching their parents vanish into the barn, where Xavier was no doubt eager to show Amelia a brand new foal or some piece of farm equipment. After more than 25 years of being married, he still wanted to share every little thing with her. He still asked for her thoughts on every single choice. He still saw her as the true partner she had always been, right by his side. It was on a frigid January morning in 1908 that Xavier didn't wake up. He had fallen asleep with his arms wrapped around Amelia, just as he had for 30 years. And sometime during the night, his heart just gave out. The doctor told them it was quiet, and that he likely felt no pain at all. But for Amelia, waking up to find him still and cold next to her, it felt like her entire world had crumbled to dust. She was 54 years old and had shared more than half her life with that man. He had been her husband, her partner in everything, her dearest friend, the father to her children, and the man who helped build her dreams. Without him, the world's colors seemed faded, food had no taste, and the future looked like a wide, empty prairie. Her children all came to be with her, along with the grandkids and the whole ranch family. They laid Xavier to rest on the hill beside his Aunt Margaret, a spot with a clear view of the mountains and the ranch he poured his life into. Nathan spoke at the funeral about his father's sense of fairness and his solid character. Clara read a poem she'd written about love that is lost. James just stood beside the fresh grave with tears rolling down his cheeks, a steady hand on his mother's shoulder. Amelia remained composed through it all, her eyes dry because her sorrow was too deep for any tears to touch. After everybody else had gone, she stayed right there by the grave, her hand resting on the cool stone marker. "You told me I could choose," she whispered into the wind, "to the mountains and to the big open sky. You gave me freedom and love and a life I never even knew I could ask for. How am I supposed to choose to keep going without you here?" But as soon as she asked the question, she already knew the answer. She would carry on because what they had built was bigger than just the two of them. She would carry on because her children still needed her, because the ranch depended on her, and because Xavier would have wanted her to live with the same full and fearless spirit she always had. So Amelia went back to the smaller house and got back to her duties, pouring all her energy into the horse breeding program and the ranch's books. She spent her days with her grandchildren, teaching them all the things that Xavier would have. Every Sunday morning she went for a ride, sometimes with Nathan or James, but usually by herself. She followed the same trails she and Xavier had ridden for years, talking to him inside her head, feeling his spirit in the very land they had worked together. Clara came back home to the ranch after her own husband passed in 1912, and she and Amelia became closer than ever, passing their evenings on the porch where Amelia and Xavier had shared so many sunsets. Amelia would tell her daughter tales of the early days, about showing up at the ranch with not a thing to her name and being told she was meant for field work. She spoke of Xavier stepping in, of his unheard-of idea that she ought to pick her own work. "He changed my whole world," Amelia said, her eyes on the sun dipping behind the mountains. "It wasn't just that he loved me, though that was a miracle in itself, but it was how he treated me like I mattered, long before any romance was between us. He believed I had value just the way I was." "You taught all of us to be that way too," Clara said. "Both of you did, by how you lived." "Your father was the finest man I ever knew," Amelia said plainly. "I was blessed to have 30 years with him." Amelia lived on until 1920, passing away in her sleep at 66 years of age with all her children and grandchildren gathered around her. She had seen the last days of the Old West give way to a new, modern time. She had watched Wyoming grow from a rugged, untamed territory into a proper state. She had seen her children lead good lives, and her grandkids grow into fine, decent adults who held on to the values she and Xavier had taught them. They buried her right next to Xavier on that hill, bringing them back together after 12 long years apart. Nathan, now in his early 40s with silver in his hair, spoke of his parents' bond and their love. He talked about the legacy they left behind, which wasn't just in land or cattle, but in the decent way they treated people in the community they fostered. "My father told my mother she could choose her own way in life," Nathan said to the crowd of family and friends. "And she chose love. She chose a partnership. She chose to build something beautiful that would last." They offered that same kind of freedom to every person who worked for them, to everyone they knew. They showed the world that real strength isn't about having control. It's about lifting others up. It's not about what you can take, but what you can give. The Broken Bee Ranch serves as a monument to what two people can create when they respect one another, love one another, and work side by side for a shared dream. The ranch kept on growing under Nathan's care and later on under his own children. The Brennan name came to mean honest business and top-quality livestock all across Wyoming and even further. But it was more than that. It became a symbol of what could happen when folks treated each other with basic human dignity and respect, when love was built on the solid ground of fairness and free will. Many years down the road, when Nathan's granddaughter asked him about the family's story, he told her how it all got started. He told her about a weary woman from Philadelphia who showed up expecting one thing and was given a choice she never imagined. He told her about a young rancher who believed in letting people decide their own futures. He told her about two people who fell in love not in spite of being different, but because they truly saw and appreciated the worth in each other. "It all began with a choice," Nathan explained. "Your great-great-grandfather Xavier told your great-great-grandmother Amelia that she could decide what kind of work she wanted to do. That one single gesture of respect changed the course of everything. It let her see him as a man she could truly love, and it laid the groundwork for everything that followed. They built the Broken Bee on that principle of mutual respect and freedom. And that's the reason we're still here, still doing well, more than 50 years later. "And what about that foreman who wanted to put her in the fields?" his granddaughter asked. "He didn't last long," Nathan replied. "He just couldn't get used to Xavier's way of doing things, of treating hands like people instead of just tools to be used. Xavier found someone better to take his place, someone who understood that a ranch, just like any town, runs best when every person feels valued and has a say." Granddaughter gazed out across the ranch, at the wide open pastures and the far-off mountains, at the entire legacy her family had built. They must have been very much in love. They surely were, Nathan agreed. But even more important, they respected each other. They were partners in the truest sense of the word. And that respect, that sense of being equals, that was the real bedrock of their love. Everything else just grew from that solid start. Up on the hill that watched over the ranch, two headstones stood together, marking the final resting place of Xavier Brennan and Amelia Grayson Brennan. The words carved on them were simple enough: loving husband and father for Xavier, loving wife and mother for Amelia. But anyone who knew their story knew those few words couldn't begin to cover the depth of what they had built, the legacy they left behind, or the example they set for everyone. They had lived through a time of great upheaval and unknowns, in a land that was wild and didn't forgive easily. They had their share of hard times and losses, of struggles and bumps in the road. But through it all, they never let go of the creed they established on that very first day when Xavier told Amelia she could make her own choice: respect, equality, and freedom. A love built on the solid ground of seeing and valuing each other as complete human beings. It was a simple way to live, but it was groundbreaking for its time and just as meaningful decades later. They told her she was meant for the fields, not the house. But Xavier said she would do whatever work she chose. With that simple declaration, he had not only changed her life, but had started a story of love and true partnership that would be told for generations. And on those quiet evenings when the wind whispers across the Wyoming grasslands and the setting sun paints the mountains in hues of gold, some folks say you can still feel their spirits on that ranch. You can still feel the love that raised something beautiful and enduring from nothing more than grit, heart, and the simple, powerful idea that every person deserves the right to choose their own path. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.